There's one sentence at the top of page 9. This is in relation to Member Hannah's comments. And it says she asked what had gone into that decision flaw. Is the word flaw meant to be there? Yeah, that's, yeah. Page 10. Page 11. Page 12. Page 13. Page 14. Would anyone be willing to move for the adoption of the minutes with that one correction? 2 corrections. Thank you. Moved by Member Phillips, seconded by Member Bunting. In terms of matters arising, we have a document table today under the cover of a letter dated May 27th, 2019 from the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Science, Energy and Technology to the committee clerk. And it encloses a letter of the same date, May 27th, from the General Manager, Mr. Watson, of Petrojam, and various appendices. Members may want to have a look at that document. It goes through some of the issues that have been raised last week in relation to the main event contract for the events involved in the 35th anniversary celebrations expenditure. It includes in the first Appendix 1 and 2 and 3. In those 3 appendices, 1, 2, and 3, there is information relating to the 30th anniversary celebration in 2012. And it is pointed out that in the case of the 30th anniversary activities, the approach that Petrojam had taken then was that an events coordinator was engaged for just over 2 months, an individual at a cost of total cost of $658,000. But that was $300,000 a month less taxes. And the total cost of the 30th anniversary celebrations as a whole was $7.65 million. And there's an expenditure report in Appendix 3 on how that was made up. 7.658. This is, of course, in quite stark contrast with the 35th anniversary celebrations 5 years later, in which the board of Petrojam approved by resolution, which is Appendix 5, a budget of $33.39 million for the events, which is roughly 4.5 times as much as was spent for the 30th anniversary 5 years earlier. there is a breakdown of the expenditure items managed by main event in Appendix 4 for the 4 events that they managed under one of the contracts, the larger contract. And those, of course, were the church service, the health fair, the anniversary banquet, and the staff and family fun day. Of course, as was noted in the Auditor General's report and in our last meeting, the total amount expended under the contract with main event for that contract was 26.999 million, 500, call it 27 million. A further 1.249 million was spent on top of that. There was a certain amount of profligacy in this 35th anniversary celebration, certainly relative to the 30th. Members, I'd also point out in Appendix 7 at the very back of the bundle that was circulated today, there is a letter from Mr. Watson, General Manager of Petrojam, to the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry, Science, Energy and Technology, Mrs. Carol Palmer. And it just confirms that, and this is on a different issue, this is to do with the $9 million that was paid to Sydenham Citizen Association. And it says, further to letter dated May 27th, 2019, kindly note that the Sydenham Citizen Association's $9 million donation request was not accompanied by a bill of quantity, nor were invoices received. So essentially there was no documentation presented to Petrojam at the time other than the letter of request for the money to be diverted from the originally approved donation, I think from the McCook's pen, for which various supporting documents had been provided. I don't know if members have any further comments on any of these issues.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah. Morning, everyone. It's a little challenging when we get this information table just in the morning at the start of the meeting. So, in a sense, I think we have to reserve, to be able to come back to it at a later meeting when we've had a chance to go through it in more detail. But just one question from a quick perusal. I think the total for the banquet was here 15.57 million.
Right from Appendix 4?
I'm working from a main event invoice dated 28th December.
Yeah, there's a sort of, at the beginning of Appendix 4, there's a listing, not in the form of invoices. The invoices follow thereafter, but there's a listing of all the items of expenditure for each of the 4 events, and the one for the banquet, as you've said, total 15.579 million.
So first of all, I was just inquiring, how many participants attend this banquet?
Remember, if you look at Appendix 6, there's a table that shows...
There's an
Appendix 6.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. And it gives you a listing of the event, the participants, and the cost.
Okay, thank you. I hadn't even reached that appendix yet.
That's roughly 37,500 per meal. 15 million.
It says cost allocated per head for this banquet was $4,800. Approximately 400 people attended.
That's more than medicine costs.
For the family fun day, it was 7,000 persons per head. Approximately 500 persons attended. The event cost $5.7 million to put on. Even the church service cost over $1,000 per head. $1,220 per head for the approximately 120 persons.
Now, something doesn't seem to be right here, though, Mr. Chairman. Just very quickly, 15,579,050 divided by 400 seems to be closer to 38,947. So I don't know who is the technical person that did this division, but they are putting a cost per head of 4,800. By my calculation, it's $38,947 per head, which seems more in keeping with the way Petrojam has expended money on birthday parties, etc.
Is Ms. Evans here?
Could anyone from Petrojam clarify that? 15,579,050 divided by 400.
Remember, I let our PR person address that comment.
The cost per head that we got on the quotation was based on the catering, just for the catering and not for the entire banquet. So that's why in the table we said there were other costs associated, but the cost per head was for the banquet, for the catering.
The catering?
Yes.
Okay. So the total then, that I said is correct, approximately $39,000 per person, per participant at the banquet.
That's what the arithmetic
because
suggests.
there would have been the plaque. Some of the cost would have been for the awardees, the plaques, and so on. So a major part of the expenditure was.
I'm just trying to get the catering, the meal. I take it is one element of it, but whatever else went into it, the entertainment, etc., the plaque itself, all the other costs that went into it. So I'm just looking at the all-in cost.
You're correct. Yes.
Per person of putting on this banquet was approximately $39,000 per head.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so perhaps you need to go through this column. What it shows, Mr. Chairman, is that we can't just take these figures on face value.
Yeah.
Because I was, to be honest with you, quite impressed that Petrojam was able to keep the cost down to $4,800 a head. But when I looked at the figure below for the family fun day, which was a total of a third, and with a higher number of participants, and the cost was greater. Intuitively, I said something is wrong with these calculations. So $39,000 per head is a lot different than $4,800 per head.
The least expensive.
It's extravagant in the extreme, in my view. It's extremely extravagant. $39,000 per head for a banquet.
Question, Chair, with your permission. Mr. Evans, the Public Relations Officer, when these preparations were being made and the costing was done, was there any alarm from within Petrojam that these were exorbitant? Because I understanding from the PAAC is that events like these are usually done in-house, that a team from within Petrojam would come together and organize these events. It was a first time when an entertainment company was engaged contractually. I remember Mr. Greenley sitting right there at the PAAC said that it was a special event and they had to do it make a special effort. But we were told subsequently that it is not unusual for events of Petrojam to be organized internally. So my question to you is, when these figures, these costings were being done, the preparations were being done, did anyone make an alarm to the management that this is out of whack with what prevailed in the past?
Well, there are some...
I'm talking about, my colleague indicated to me that there was a board resolution about a 33.3 million approval, but the internal management team, was there any concern, given that board is new, management is new, but you have an history, a culture of providing these events on an economical basis? Did any of the management staff raise any alarm to the management when you came up with these numbers?
Well, I cannot speak with regard to the management staff because I'm not on the management committee. But as it regards the planning committee, the cost for the plaques and so on were quotes that we also, we've made our checks. The only concern we had was with that what we expressed to management as a committee. Well, there was probably nothing in writing, but we had expressed it verbally, was with the management fees that were being charged as part of the costing, yes, for main event.
So you recognize that something was untoward there, and you made the alarm by bringing it to their attention, and it was ignored.
Well, I wouldn't say, well, I'm not going to say untoward, but we had concerns about the management fees.
Thanks.
It didn't strike you as odd that the overall budget of over 30 million was 4.5 times what was spent 5 years early on the 30th? That didn't strike you as untoward?
Why the budget was, as you say, 4.5 times what was there was some of the other activities that would have been planned internally were grouped as part of the 35th anniversary activities. So, for example, the health fair, we would have had a health fair separate from the 35th anniversary, but it formed part of the budget in this instance. The family fun day would have, we don't usually, a family fun day is sometimes held every 5 years. It's not sometimes it's held annually, but it wouldn't have formed part of the 35th anniversary activities. But the GM in this instance asked that everything be included as part of the 35th anniversary celebrations. So usually it would just be the banquet and the church service.
By the way, looking at the arithmetic on that sheet in Appendix 5, for the family fund day, if you divide the approximately 500 persons into the costs, you get $11,470 per head, not $700. And similarly for the church service, if you divide the $402,425 by the approximately 120 persons, you get $3,353 per head for the church service, not $1,220. So these numbers are quite misleading and all understated, substantially understated.
Chairman, I wasn't here last week, but there's something in the minutes that has grabbed my attention, and it's on page 2. You recall that the previous meeting had raised the concern about Petrojam buying oil and paying demurrage costs. at the storage facility in Port Esquivel. The minutes have recorded that, and I'll read here, the chairman said that based on information submitted, Petrojam had not been able to locate any record for an additional payment of $120,000 for storage at Port Esquivel. Mr. Hewitt added that no additional costs were incurred beyond the $343,000 US, which was estimated to be the loss incurred by the company as a result of the purchase from CCI as opposed to another supplier, etc., etc. This $342,650 US dollars included the demurrage costs. So for the report to be made that there's no record of that is a little misleading. The point being made by presenting it as this, Mr. Chairman, suggests that this is only for the cost of the oil. My point that I raised then was that you paid extra for the oil and you paid extra for storing it for a period in which you did not have your own storage capacity because your stores were already filled. So you pay more for the oil and you pay more for the storage, and that is why the taxpayers of this country had to bear that $342,650 US dollars, which is rounded off in the minutes here as $343,000 US dollars. So I think the records from Petrojam should reflect that. No one suggested that there was an additional cost of $120,000 for the merge costs above that, but that is included in that $343,000. Am I not correct, Mr. Hewitt?
Morning, Chairman, morning, committee. Just to clarify, so there was an initial estimate of an additional cost of $342,650, including, as the member suggests, $140,000 that was at the time estimated for demurrage on the substantive cargo that was expected. As it turned out, there was no demurrage, but there was some additional volume of cargo that was taken. So the eventual outcome was $283,710, just to clarify.
Chairman, Mr. Hewitt, hold on a minute, sir. A couple of weeks ago, we got one information. Last week, another set of information was presented. I know you're telling us now, telling this committee, that it is not so, but a different thing. You know, it reminds me when I was going to high school and I learned O-level chemistry. And when I went to sixth form, I learned that a lot of the things I learned in O-level was not necessarily so, but it is so now.
No, I don't. Remember, I don't think so. I don't think you're being fair to us, really. No, I mean,
to what? The chemistry or to you?
The teacher. To us. I don't know about the chemistry. No, last week, the question was asked, is there additional expenditure? And the answer was no. The clarification that you have raised this morning is what I'm responding to. So there was no additional expenditure. The actual additional expenditure was $280,000. That's the fact.
How much?
$283,710 versus the 343 before. So it was actually a little less than what was estimated before. So there was no sort of...
that included the additional price that was paid for the product?
Yes.
And the other costs that you...
There was no additional cost as we had responded last week.
So the only component of that actual loss was the pricing differential?
Correct.
Okay.
And that's the final, Mr. Hewitt, on that.
That is the final chemistry, member.
Thank you very much, sir.
Just on the issue of on the minutes, page 7, where we had asked the Ministry of Finance if there was any concern from their end or any investigation on the issue of the pricing, and they said that they would check and let us know.
Ms. Blake, you have any response to that issue? This relates to the decision of the general manager to impose a $2 price reduction over 1 week, and then after a break of a week, it was continued or reimposed for a month approximately, and the company sustained several $100 million of losses as a result. And the question was whether this was something that the Ministry of Finance had investigated or was investigating.
Right. My information is that the Financial Investigation Division is assisting the other investigative bodies, but the Ministry of Finance is not doing its own investigation, but they are offering support to the other investigative bodies.
No, well, the question was actually at the point in time when the tax revenues were less than and the $2 reduction was given, if at that point in time the ministry had some concerns, or was there any concerns expressed to Petrojam then, or the ministry, in the pricing mechanism then? It's not if FID is now investigating, but at that, for this particular issue, was there any communication between the Ministry of Finance and the parent ministry or Petrojam on the pricing mechanism then, which resulted in a loss of revenue for the government?
I will have to verify that information, yes.
Emma Hanna.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Morning, PS. In the latest documentation that has been tabled, there's a letter from Mr. Watson responding essentially to a question I had asked last week about, it's in Appendix 7, and it states, Mr. Chairman, further to letter dated May 27th, 2019, kindly note that the Signum Citizens Association's $9 million donation request was not accompanied by a bill of quantity, nor were invoices received. And one of the concerns we had last week, and one of the questions we had asked PS, was whether or not it was usual for bills of quantities or estimates to have been tabled. And you said that you were advised that it was usual for them to receive estimates. I'm not sure if you've had sight of this letter yet, but what systems are now in place to investigate that $9 million? I know there is an investigation going on. I believe it's MOCA that is now involved. MOCA that is involved, but have you made any headway? Because the board or the association says they knew nothing of it. Estimates were not provided to your ministry, and I'm aggrieved, because one of the things that certainly we get as members of Parliament, especially from other agencies who like to investigate us, sometimes personally, when we don't accede to the requests or the policy guidelines of how things should be estimated or directed, then to see these kinds of activities taking place and nothing comes of it, I'd like to know what is going to come of it.
Morning,
Morning,
Chairman. Morning, everyone. As I indicated last week, the ministry does not have the capacity to do investigations of any nature. So whenever matters arise, we call on the services of the state to do the investigation. When I assumed responsibility as permanent secretary, I sought to confirm with MOCA and with the Integrity Commission that these investigations were underway, because I was advised that they were so being done. And it was confirmed that the investigations are underway, and so the ministry awaits the outcome of these investigations. And I dare say we will be seeking to examine the outcome of these processes. And as I sat here and listened to the dispute in the numbers, which is why I've deliberately asked Petrojam to submit the records so you get them. So I'm just the conveyor belt, if you will, because I have concerns about putting forward any information which can be successfully challenged. And so I've been sitting here and I've been thinking that I will be doing some internal consultations within the ministry, and I will be instituting some other things of my own in accordance with the authority vested in me as permanent secretary, because these things just cannot continue.
P.S. Have you spoken with MOCA to find out when they would have completed their investigations? Because I would imagine that the findings of the investigation would aid your ministry in putting those things in place and cleaning up a lot of the discrepancies and breaches that we have seen.
I not only spoke with MOCA and the Integrity Commission, I wrote to both because I wanted to get an idea of when the investigations would be concluded. I have not yet been advised of a date. Suffice it to say that I got confirmation that the investigations were underway. And of course, I got a letter from MOCA seeking my assistance with several pieces of documentation, which I have supplied to them. And so I guess, like the committee, the ministry awaits the outcome.
Thank you. Members, unless there is any. Okay.
Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Campbell.
P.S. I'd just like to inquire into one little matter. Last week, it was suggested that the former general manager, Mr. Grindley, had given some instructions to make a reduction in the price of oil, which would come to the market. And it appears that he did not have such power. Is it your view that if he did so without the authority of the committee, the pricing committee, that would amount to misconduct in a public office?
P.S. Before you respond to that, I think it's important that it be clearly established what the governance arrangements around the pricing committee were. I have not seen any constitution or terms of reference of the pricing committee that determines how decisions are made. What we have seen is in one of these plethora of documents, we have seen a scheme which indicates how the decision making worked in the pricing committee over a period of time leading up to this event we're discussing now with the reduction, during the period of that reduction, and afterwards. And both before and after, the document that we were looking at showed that decisions were made by consensus, whereas during the period of time when these reductions were implemented, it said that there was a different approach taken, and the general manager, his decision prevailed without there being consensus. What is not clear, though, is that that constituted some breach of the pricing committee's rules. I don't know if that's the case, because I think Mr. Watson, at some point in describing how the pricing committee worked, had indicated that the general manager's position on it was one of significant influence. I can't remember exactly what he said at the time as to whether ultimately the general manager's decision would prevail, but the normal modus operandi was to proceed by consensus. I only mention that because you're making a...
Ask Mr.
You're putting a pointed question to the PS.
Let me ask Mr. Watson, what is it that obtained prior to yes,
November 2016.
Yeah. When the pricing committee, did the pricing committee involve the membership of the general manager, insofar as you know?
Yes, it did. So it would have included the general manager,
right?
Support staff from logistics, accounts.
And member of the board?
We have had board members there as well, yes.
And was the general manager's position such that he could override what the other members of the committee?
The typical modus operandi is that we would have a consensus discussion. So we would be discussing the pricing movement, what's happening in the world market, whether the price is going up or down. And based on those guidelines, we would have a vote, for want of a better word, and we'd say, okay, this is the best direction that the price should go, and an amount.
Yes, and that would include everybody making an input.
That's correct.
But was there any time that the general manager would impose his decision and his determination of what the price ought to be?
I can only speak from my time when I was there. The answer to that is no.
Was there any document or board decision when the pricing committee was established that set out how decisions of the pricing committee are to be made? Is typically where an important committee such as that is established, the board would have to authorize it, and presumably would also indicate the methodology by which decisions are to, whether it's by majority, whether it requires unanimity, whether the general manager has an ultimate say, and so on, or was it really not that specific and it was kind of just a convention as to how it worked?
It wasn't that specific. From my time there, it was always a consensus decision.
Do you recall, Mr. Watson, any time during your tenure that Minister Paulwell would give instructions which was in contravention of that which was put together by the pricing committee, that he would give instructions to affect the price which would go out to the market?
I can only recall one such decision. We had a hurricane passing through Jamaica, and it hit the United States. And pretty much the refineries were shutting down. The price went up by somewhere in the region of maybe $7 or $8 that week when the hurricane passed and hit the U.S. And the minister, in discussion with the board, said, look, for this week, can you at least hold the price rather than go up by the $8 or whatever it was? And I think he may have even said it publicly that he asked Petrojam to hold the price that week in order to not burden the Jamaican motorists but it was because of that particular event. I'm not aware of it any other time, that influence.
But the question they asked, the answer is yes.
Yes, with the explanation.
No, thank you for the explanation, because an answer such as yes without context would be an incomplete and misleading answer. Don't be put off by such comments to your left.
So the answer is yes.
Mr. Chairman, may I?
Mr. Campbell, you finished or you have more? You have more to ask or you finished? That's it? Mr. Member Jackson.
Sir.
Well, sorry.
Please.
Yes.
Yes, I was indicating. I would like to just remind the committee that as far as the ministry is aware, the pricing committee operates in the context of the letter of Hugh Hart of 1988. I have just been advised, though, that there is a terms of reference that has now been developed by Petrojam for the pricing committee. And may I remind this committee that we have now sought the assistance of the IMF in coming up with a policy which we will be taking forward as soon as we are in receipt of that advice.
Could we actually please see that terms of reference that Petrojam has developed for the pricing committee?
Sorry, I didn't.
The terms of reference that Petrojam has developed recently for the pricing committee?
I believe it.
It's being checked in the bundle, sir.
I believe we had submitted that. Just checking the price. We will check for it and let you know. There was a section.
Johnson.
Mr. Chairman, as Member Bunting indicated, we just got this morning, and I was perusing the appendix, really 35th anniversary. I yield to PS.
Yes, yes.
The TOR is there.
Thank you, PS.
Go ahead, Chair. Okay. Now, I was just going through the invoices, and I recall that the main event company was retained for these events. When I look through a couple of invoices here, I can refer to invoice in the appendix, invoice number M8431. There are event service fee. Now the company is retained to manage these events, execute them, but through a retainer fee. And we are seeing on one invoice here, event service management fee, $2,032,050. And another one, $748,050, event management services, management service fee. Now I have a difficulty that you are retained to provide a service, and then when you actually have the events, you are paid a management fee again. Well, no. So I want to be clear. How much was the retainer fee that was paid to main event? And to clarify whether or not it excluded any specific service provision,
It's 30.
since they are invoiced separately.
I think, remember, you recall when Latoya was speaking, she said that was one of the things that surprised her, that we were paying a management fee in addition to having the retainer contract. She had mentioned that earlier.
Okay.
I can't remember if you were here. But the payment to main event for the retainer was 13,985,000.
13 million.
985,825 per annum, which was paid monthly though.
It was paid monthly for them to do
It was per annum paid monthly.
Paid annual. So over $1 million paid monthly.
That's correct.
And if they never do anything, they would be paid $1 million. And if they do something, they are paid for it again.
No, they're paid extra. A retainer, you know better than that. That's right.
And this is an unusual event at Petrojam. As was indicated, it never happened before. It was invented at Petrojam in this occasion.
Ask the chairman to explain to you.
I just want to be clear, because as was told by the officer, these events were executed by an internal committee of Petrojam, where no retainer was paid and no management fee was paid. The employees of Petrojam executed this event, and all of a sudden, in 2017, a management what do you call it there? Retainer of almost $14 million just per annum was invented. And on top of that,
Mr. Chairman.
Plus a 15% fee on the
plus
other
a
contract.
15%.
But Mr. Chairman, the contract,
if
if Member Jackson would yield to Member and Member Clark, if you go back through the original retainer contract for main event, you would see what they were contractually obligated to do for the 13 million. So the 15%, the larger question I want to ask, I don't know who would have been overseeing the signing of the approval of these invoices for the payment. Was the 15% questioned? Because by right, there should not have been a 15% management service fee against the background of what they were contractually obligated to do.
And I note that all of those invoices were approved for payment by Ms. Ramharak. Why was the HR manager approving invoices relating to payment for the events for the 35th anniversary celebration?
So the Public Relations Department, remember, falls within our HR department. So you will see that most of the contracts, the invoices would have been approved by the then HR manager. I'm not aware, I'm not sure if Latoya would have been aware of questions being asked around the fee. But that's the approval as you see on the invoices. And
we should call back Ms. Ramarak to ask her about it. Because she has been rewarded with a $15 million separation for these contracts that she executed.
Member Campbell.
Mr. Watson, insofar as you know, in relation to the two contracts, the retainer contract and the contract for the provision of services for the 35th anniversary celebrations, were there any queries raised by the internal auditor?
I'm not aware.
Sorry, we're jumping around a bit, but going back to the other issue we've been discussing, the pricing committee. And thank you for pointing out the draft terms of reference, which are at the back of one of the exhibits, the pricing exhibit in this Appendix 2 bundle. I note that what is proposed under the Rubric of Decision-Making reads as follows. Decisions are to be taken by a simple majority of votes. Effort should be made to arrive at decisions by consensus. In any meeting where there is an equality of votes, the chairman shall have a casting vote, and the chairman is a general manager or his designate. The chair is entitled to veto the decision of the majority in circumstances where he is not in agreement with the final ex-refinery prices. In exercising the veto power, the chair shall determine the final ex-refinery price using the average of the prices represented by majority vote and the minority one. Decisions of the committee are binding on all members of the committee. Why in the same paragraph do we have these two inconsistent statements?
That's a new, just for
clarification. This is an undated draft headed, what the date is, says, adopted at the Board of Directors meeting held at blank on blank 2019. It's not dated,
okay,
but it's
so
a 2019.
It's a 2019. Yeah. So, but that seems inconsistent with that table that we saw that outlined how the decisions were made, because I'm almost sure the table said, and if you asked me to find it in a couple of minutes, I probably couldn't. But I think my colleague is going to assist me. Yes. Under decision making, this is Appendix 8 of the packet, the bundle with a cover letter dated May 14th, 2019, and the final page in that bundle sets out a table with the pricing committee, the meeting attendees, the membership, and the decision making.
That was the one I was referring to.
Right. I mean, we need a document manager to assist. But that column or that cell in the final column and lower row says, under decision making, the practice of the final decision on the price movement being taken by the general manager after consensus is achieved among the members / attendees has resumed. So this is inconsistent, Mr. Chairman, with the terms of reference that you just read, which would seem more consistent with the December 19th to 2016 to July 24th, 2018 approach, where the final decision was taken by the general manager, irrespective of whether consensus was achieved.
Yeah, and I agree, but also even within the draft terms of reference itself, there's an inconsistency within the same paragraph, because it starts off saying decisions are to be taken by a simple majority of votes. But then it goes on to say that the chair is entitled to veto the decision of the majority. I think that, to my mind, lends itself to sharp practice or other decisions being taken in a non-transparent manner. So normally on any committee or board, decisions are by majority. If there's a equal number for and against, the chairman has a casting vote. I don't know why you don't adopt that normal practice here and try to do it by consensus, as would normally prevail in most cases.
Chairman, well, as you say, it's a draft and it is work in progress. But one of the discussions we have had in developing this document was to ensure that we didn't have a situation where one person could say, this is the price and that's it. And that is why we said, well, if there's a discrepancy then on the consensus, then let us use the average of everybody. So it is still consensual in a sense. So we're not disagreeing.
Except that the decision to go to this average is a chair's decision. You know, and supposing there's an outlier in that average, which is based on some completely unreasonable position.
All right, well, we will go back to the drawing board with that, Chair.
And Chair, it would prevent from having another rogue chairman, that will take that unilateral decision.
Rogue is an understatement.
Members, I want to just point out that we have another school visiting us today. Members, we have with us the Horace Clark High School students from St. Mary, Central St. Mary, I'm told, and we want to welcome them here and their teacher. Very good. All right, members, I just want to point out that last week we received this bundle on the day of the meeting, and it is a very thick bundle. We didn't have a chance to look at it, and I think we should look at it if we haven't done so. And at some point, we may need to revisit the issues raised in this. This is the one on the cover of the letter to the committee clerk from the PS of May 17th, 2019.
Chair, there are issues that I would like to raise out of it, so you can indicate when.
I think we've more or less finished matters arising from the minutes, and we can go into the substantive
Could you just
issue.
repeat the date of the cover letter? So
May 17th.
May 17th.
Yeah. So item 6 is a continuation of the discussion on the Auditor General's report. And this is if you're ready and want to raise any issues coming from this, you may do so now.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to go to Appendix 10 that has to deal with the perimeter wall, Chairman. As additional information has been provided to us in this folder, and I wanted to just basically bring in the Auditor General in the discussion in getting an understanding of the process of when it is that how the process of emergency procurement is done, and if it is legal, because in this document, what is evident is that the contractor, the NCC, National Contract Commission, had concern about how the procurement was done for the wall. We have emails here showing Appendix 10. Emails showing the concern from the team at Petrojam on the direction that the former general manager was taking. The former general manager himself listing out a list of companies that he's suggesting should be brought into a limited tender. The concern of the team of this limited tender, and then the general manager himself suggesting the company of Construction Solution, giving a pre-approval for this emergency, and the process itself seems very untidy, and I beg the question: why is it that we have entities such as National Contracts Commission, and they taking a decision, and the general manager still continuing? It is evident that also his application to the National Contracts Commission was after he had already approved the emergency contract. So let me just ask the Auditor General if she can just give us a broad overview of the process of when an entity is to proceed in that way.
To make matters easier for all of us, I'll just refer you to page 58 of the report and the footnote that I'm going to read, that footnote verbatim.
1 second, so that we can go for that report. Which dated report?
Page 58.
The original
of the
one?
original
of the
report.
Auditor General's report.
Yes.
I mean, it is so used that the pages are coming apart. Page 54.
Page 58.
58, sorry.
Footnote 54.
Yes.
It's at the bottom of the page, and it is
Okay.
Procurement Guidelines, Section 1.1.5, contracting under emergency circumstances. The need for such procurement must be sudden, unexpected, and a pressing necessity or exigency. Where an emergency situation exists as defined above, the procuring entity may engage a contractor by means of direct contracting. The head of the procuring entity shall give approval for the issuing of emergency contracts up to a maximum value of $100 million Jamaican. Procuring entities shall ensure that the value for money objective is met before awarding emergency contracts. So the circumstances in which an entity can proceed in this way are where the need for the emergency procurement must be sudden, unexpected, and a pressing necessity or exigency.
But in this case, Chairman, it is not sudden. And yeah, it is not sudden. And the NCC in its note to the then permanent secretary, it says the NCC considered the justification provided by the selection of the contractor to be inadequate. But this is dated 10th of March 2017. But then when you look further ahead, in
the preceding paragraph of that letter of March 10th from the NCC to the then PS, having reviewed the information provided, the NCC, being cognizant that the works on the Marcus Garvey Drive have been ongoing for some time now, questions the need for utilizing the emergency contracted procedure.
Exactly.
And wishes to be advised on the date when Petrojam became aware of the need to replace the perimeter fencing. The NCC considers the justification provided for the selection of the contractor to be inadequate, and so on.
And then if you look at the emergency pre-approval form, was dated December 13, 2016. Yeah?
That must be a typo, though.
No, December 13, 2016.
Oh,
the emergency form approved to proceed was done in January 7th, 2017.
Oh, and that's where the typo is.
Yes.
Because it says 2016.
2016.
Yeah.
So it shows that all the approvals were given even before the NCC was brought into this discussion. But it also questions, Chairman, at what point would the then permanent secretary intervene in this issue? Because the team itself made some concerns, and is Mr. Donald Johnson still?
He's still there.
He's still employed? He's not here?
No, he's not.
No, he's not here. Because he was a project manager then. And Chairman,
in the NCC's letters to the PS, each of them makes reference to a letter dated February 24th, 2017 from Mr. Floyd Greenlee to the NCC, I assume. But we don't have that letter, do we? I haven't seen it.
Yes, it is there. It is some additional questions that were asked of Mr. Greenlee to...
No, it's a letter from him dated February 24th.
Right. Well, no, that letter isn't in here.
Okay.
It is.
Because even the justification, the additional questions...
Sorry, Chairman. the letter from Mr. Grindley is in the package. It's in the same set of documents.
Right, there's one from him on March 23.
10? Is it in Appendix 10 or another appendix?
8 from the back, 8 pages from the back.
8 pages from the back.
Yeah. That's at this big bundle.
Thank you.
Yeah, February 24th. Yes, it is there. This is the one giving the reasons behind the emergency. And the, yeah. You found it, Chair?
Yeah, thank you.
Chairman, may I just say something?
Yes, please, go ahead.
In emergency procurement, the entity is allowed to, using the guidelines, to proceed with emergency procurement, but to inform the NCC within 30 days of that emergency procurement. So it is not, and your limit is $100 million. So it is not unusual for the NCC to be advised after the fact. Yes? But the issue really is that you need to properly establish that there was an emergency, because the guidelines are very clear as to how you go to emergency procurement. And hence, you had this exchange with the NCC that's before the committee.
But to do an emergency also, would the board have to, should the board be involved in that in that expenditure? In the sense,
I would say
getting an approval
the board should have a procurement committee. That's what boards are to have in the current corporate governance arrangements, and therefore should be overseeing procurement of the entity. I don't know if that was so.
Of course, the company was on a particular path prior to his appointment as general manager and had been over several months working with the NWA towards executing this project. He came in and decided to go a totally different route.
But the NCC letter from Raymond McIntyre makes it clear that the NCC questioned the need for utilizing the emergency contracting procedure, because it was clear to them that the works on Marcus Garvey Drive had been ongoing for some time prior to this. So, there's absolutely no way this could have satisfied the criteria for emergency contracting.
But remember, even before that, Ms. Chevril Shaw,
she every step along the way.
Right, she gave a background, and remember, this was just days after Mr. Grindley was employed to thing. And
every other professional.
Let me ask, did the board, the then board, have a procurement committee? Can anyone answer that? AG, can you, from your knowledge?
My understanding is that this matter did not go to the procurement committee.
So the then general manager then took it up on himself too?
And yes, and for clarification, I'd also refer you to paragraph 3.1.21 in support of an opinion we formed, and also the NCC, that the Petrojam would have been aware of this matter pertaining to Marcus Garvey from as far back as June 2014.
Point. Could you repeat the reference?
3.1.21.
Yes. So it reads, however, Petrojam records indicated that from as far back as June 2014, it was aware of the impending Marcus Garvey Drive improvement project, as NWA in considering the final road design, conducted joint site visits, and had ongoing discussions with Petrojam regarding the potential business impact of the mid-P on Petrojam's business operation. And on December 6, Cheryl Shaw gave a background to the then general manager and also the implications of aborting the current process and the impact of the delay itself, Chairman. And I still question if it was who was directing the then general manager then, because I am of the view, Chairman, that the then general manager was not acting on his own, but most certainly when you look at the pricing mechanism and this days after being employed was being directed by someone. Yeah? And I'm strongly of the view that persons who were board members then, who still sit on government boards, ought not to be able to sit on government boards. You still have one member of the former PCJ, Petrojam board that is sitting on PCJ. And Query.
Still on their HR committee.
Yes.
As is Mr. Myrie, who came
and
here
it is
saying he was a courier.
It is evident. It is evident that these board members were incompetent to even sit on a board, in their actions in overseeing the Petrojam during that period. What I want to find out from
that's putting it lightly.
Yeah, but I want to find out from the PS though. I mean, in instances like this, right? And we had spoke about the synergy between PCJ and Petrojam. PCJ being the parent company for Petrojam. Have we corrected the, I'll use the word, the lack of oversight from the parent company to its subsidiary?
Or you mean it's lack of, maybe that was part of the...
Yeah, it's lack of oversight. So that when instances like this, I'm not saying that no management will do things like this, but that there is an instance where a red flag will come up where the parent company can either take action or bring it to a, at what point do we mitigate instances like this going forward?
I did indicate to the committee that we were doing our own internal review in the ministry, and we are awaiting the strategic review document that should be available to us this week. I am advised that the work is still on track to be finished this month, which is this week now. And so as soon as we've put all of those together, we will be implementing new arrangements for the tighter and more efficient and effective management of the operations.
But, Madam Pierce, I can respect the fact that you're waiting on that review, but be a review from an independent body or what? I think I would have loved to see that there are things being put in place, even if it is temporarily, to ensure that we mitigate from instances. Because, Madam Pierce,
remember, we are doing other things. Yeah. We are reconstituting the board of Petrojam. That's one. I have already written, and in other instances, the minister has written, asking for the implementation of all the recommendations of the Auditor General. We are in the ministry implementing the recommendations that fall to us as a ministry within the broader framework. So we're not just waiting on the review.
That's what I want to hear.
We are doing what we can now. We have a matter that's going to cabinet, and then we will be going further when we have the review. But it's, there are some things that you need to act properly so that you don't get into other problems.
Yes, you mentioned reconstituting the Petrojam board.
Yes.
The Petrojam board, as I understand it, was replaced sometime after all of this scandal broke.
Yes.
And a new chairman and a new set of directors was appointed. I think Mr. Hu is the current chairman of the Petrojam board. Paul Hu, I believe.
Yeah, that's the chairman, but we are putting other members on the board. We sought the advice in light of the new ownership arrangements.
Right.
We have gotten the advice of the Attorney General's department, and we are, as the minister indicated, she's using a transparent process. So we are inviting nominees to be on the various boards within the portfolio. And
will that include PCJ?
Yes, all boards in the portfolio. So we are doing a revamp. Unfortunately, it's taken us longer because the minister is not minded to just pick some names. She wishes to use a transparent process, and then we are going to be going through the matter of training the boards, giving them their handbooks, and going through the process, and then we will be, as a ministry, doing our supervision of the portfolio as is required of us.
No, what I was saying, P.S., the matter is complicated, and I support what Member Phillips is saying, because I saw the valuation of the company recently, and if we are to get even foreign investors to come in and take a stake in state-owned entities, Mr. Chairman, and our own local personnel manages the company in such an incompetent way, it doesn't augur well for future investments in the country, is what I'm saying. So that's why I think there needs to be a fast tracking of putting in place the measures just for damage control internationally. This is, every time I come here, I feel more aggrieved by what has happened in this company.
Yeah, I agree.
Chair, and Madam Pierce, and the frustration comes out of, because when you look at the email on the 7th from then Sir Grinley, listing out 6 companies that he is suggesting should be included in a limited tender. And then by the 9th, he's suggesting Construction Solution, and then fast-tracking the approval process. And, every time something like this, and the longer that we spend on this, and you start unearthing the way how he carried out his management practices, I still stand at 1, he couldn't be acting on his own. Right? 2, what sanctions, even if he's not there? I mean, I know that there's criminal and everything, and the frustration is after 1 year, sitting on the PAAC, now sitting on the PAC and going through this. And, I remember when Colonel Spencer and the whole light bulb thing, the man was arrested before him even was fully charged. And in this matter, not one soul. And the frustration.
Wicked.
A minister that has been removed from his job, but yet still every dot is connected right to him. And the chairman goes away by just reimbursing what he was going to steal.
What we have discovered.
What we have discovered.
So far.
Who don't want to come back to Jamaica because they have U.S. residency or citizenship. But the taxpayers then we sit down with these documents here, and I feel like
Yeah, I mean, there's no
believe
doubt
me,
that
it's frustrating.
the extended period of time
Man.
that the agencies of the state that are tasked with bringing persons to book and avoiding impunity, the length of time it has taken. We have had no report from the Integrity Commission on this matter.
Chairman.
We have had no public statement from MOCA for some time. I think the people of Jamaica deserve better. This is really an untenable situation, and it will affect international investment. The IMF are already commenting on it.
And then I see the contractor trying to defend the construction of the wall in the paper, and 2 full-page ads, couple $100,000 well for each.
But then you
And then you
more
see,
contracts with
and then
government.
and then you sit read this document.
A bunch of bandits. Mr. Chairman, the worst part of it too is that one critical player in this, the HR manager and administration, procurement manager, got rewarded by the government. That rubbing salt in the taxpayer's face, and yet I went to Maypen Hospital yesterday to visit the injured policeman, and most of the vehicles down there that the police have not working. 30% of them not working because of money, and this is what we're doing with taxpayers' money.
It's really shocking. Members, I think we can go back to the prompt. Member Campbell. Yes, Member Campbell.
You know what? You know what? Gentlemen, you know what? Didn't tell the truth.
Gentlemen, there's an issue. To deal
members, calm down. Member Campbell is on the floor.
To deal with the wall, because I saw, I think it was in last week in the papers, and regrettably I don't have the papers with me this morning, an estimate. Whereas we were told that there was an internal estimate for $30 million for the construction of the wall. Can you say whether or not there was a second estimate for $76 million? At what point did that estimate come into play? Because we were told about one for $30 million. Or somewhere there, but who prepared this internal estimate for $76 million?
The project engineer appeared to have prepared it.
The project engineer at Petrojam?
At the time, yes.
May I just ask, if there is an estimate for 76, why we've been hearing all along about the 29 million from NWA on a contract for 96. No one mentioned that there was an internal estimate for 76. No one mentioned that in the meeting here, no. All we've been hearing about the 29 from NWA and the 96 million for the contract, and now we're hearing that you had an internal estimate for 76 million.
There was another. There was the original MOU was signed for 29.
Call it 30 million.
Yeah, I'm not speaking about that. I'm talking about, I'm not talking about what the MOU was signed for. You just said there was after Member Campbell intervened, that there was an internal estimate for $76 million.
Chair.
So I'm trying to find out something about the 76. I'm not talking about the MOU. We've been hearing about 29 million MOU with NWA.
What is your question, Member One, as to when that estimate was prepared?
No, I'm saying no mention was ever made of it. And I'm inquiring about this $76 million.
Yes.
It says it was prepared by the internal, the project engineer, what have you. So I need for us to...
Just to that estimate?
Yeah.
There's a letter in the document of May the 17th. If
Two
you go
pages
from
to the
back
back.
page,
2 pages to the back.
you'll see it. Yeah.
And Chair, if they
Yes, it's in this.
it makes even matters worse because
This is on January 12th, that one, the one dated January 12th,
Yes.
2017?
January 12, 2017. Because the then general manager
Go from the back.
had changed the scope of work, right? Changed the scope of work. The comparable estimate came to 76. Construction solution came to 96. He then gave a pre-approval for the change of scope and the additional amount on January 12, 2017. Right? He gave a pre-approval for that amount, which was 20%, was 26.78%, $20 million more than what the comparable estimate was. So even that in itself should have raised a red flag. Be it 30 or 76. It is still much more than what the comparable estimate is.
I take your point, Member Phillips. What I want to go on to ask is, when the internal estimate was prepared for $76 million, was there a subsequent adjustment to the works which were to be done?
He said no. No.
But this, the $76 million estimate, under normal contracting provisions, there is a proviso for one to go somewhere in the region of 15%. And where would that have taken us?
About 15%?
15% above the estimates.
Sorry?
15% above the estimates which were prepared by the internal.
Well, no, that's 15% is to account for fluctuations and variations based on the actual conditions when the work starts, I believe.
Chairman, no. The 15% is a ballpark that is provided within the procurement rules, that your estimate, in other words, when somebody tenders, valued against your estimate, it may be 15% higher or 15% lower, and that would still be an acceptable range. Outside of that, then you are in other territories.
And so, would you then say that the sum which was ultimately charged, the 96 million, was so outrageous outside of that band that it could not be justified at all?
But this is still, the 96 is still way outside the 15%. The 15% would have been 87. So I know you're struggling to justify it. Remember?
I'm not trying to justify.
It's still well outside the 15%. But I don't think we have to relitigate this. The Auditor General has already drawn her conclusions on page 58, 3.1.24.
I am not questioning what the Auditor General has found. That is not my issue. We were led to believe at this committee that all that we were questioning was a $30 million provision. You had an agreement, and sir, there was an occasion when I wasn't here. Thank you. All right. Sir, and it's for the very reason that I read it last week that I could know that there was a $76 million estimate. I may be economical with the truth, but I don't lie.
But that's a frank and telling admission.
Let us get to the, so we have a situation, $76 million, and then the contractor who comes in gives you an estimate for 96. But then he has that variation that he can do. He can operate between 76 and 87 or somewhere there. That you're saying that only applies when he's tendering?
No, member. The fluctuation, the variance is available to the procuring entity. Yes? So if the proposal comes in 15% above or 15% below, you may still accept that proposal. Yes? So it's not for the contractor. It's not for the person providing the service. That's a flexibility to the procuring entity, right? And then you should settle. You should not be going above that 15%.
Well, so Petrojam was entitled to go as far as 87 within the rules?
I don't know about entitled, but it's an allowance.
The whole thing, and only if this thing is properly conceptualized as an emergency procurement process, which the National Contracts Commission has said it isn't, and we haven't seen anything that would suggest it is. So the whole thing was to come in at below as close to 100 million as possible. And it's outside of the tolerance of the 15%. Mrs. Holmes, welcome.
Thanks, Chairman. I think I'm going to be digressing a little bit. I have for some time had a serious concern with an element of the audit report that seems just not to be the focus of any of the committees. And it has to do with the 600,000 barrels of oil loss that we had over a 5-year period as identified in the Auditor General's report. Again, I'm going to come from the perspective of being an auditor. Why this concerns me so greatly is I have not heard anything that gives me a sense of comfort that going forward we are actually working towards or putting in place a mechanism to determine exactly how much oil lands on our shores. And if it is that we are still not at a place that we are able to properly verify and calculate exactly what we get, then I believe we're always going to be in a gray area of claiming that we have oil losses. So PS, Mr. Barnett? Mr. Watson, probably better so because Mr. Watson has been with the institution for a long, long time. Mr. Watson, I am trying to figure out if there is any effort being made to put in place a mechanism by which you can verify to 100% exactly what it is that we buy and receive at Petrojam in terms of our oil. Why I'm asking that question is if we can't determine what we get, we will never be able to determine how much we are genuinely losing versus how much is stolen. And in an organization and institution where persons over the years are comfortable in their understanding of how the process works, for us as government members, opposition and members of the government, we owe it to determine what we are losing in the billions instead of only grandstanding on what we are losing in the millions.
Mrs. Holness, there is a forensic audit that is being commissioned to look into that very issue. What we've been told in the documents is that across the world, in the case of refineries, there is a benchmark of what is a tolerable level of unaccounted losses because there is evaporation and so on and so on. We were in the period of review, in that 5-year period, there was a spike of 60% increase in the amount of unaccounted for oil losses. Previously, the number had been trending down through efforts that were made.
Chairman,
yeah.
I'm very clear. I actually used to audit ESO. Chairman, I want Mr. Watson to answer that question, separate and apart from any forensic audit. The forensic audit will give you an indication as to how outside of the benchmark, which is exactly what the Auditor General pointed out as well. But my deeper question is this: are we able to verify 100% what it is that we receive, what it is that we buy, yes or no? And if not, yes, and I strongly doubt the answer is yes, what are we putting in place to ensure that we are able to determine exactly what it is that we buy? Because I don't think that Jamaica is the only country in the world that is purchasing oil from off its shores. Are all the other countries in this place that they don't have any mechanism to 100% verify what it is that they buy?
Remember, every product that we receive, we can verify what we have received, and that is the base on which we pay. We have an inspection system where when the ship comes in, you have an inspector, an independent inspector, who will go on the ship and verify what is supplied. This is an independent person. And there's a yes, it's an individual, but it works for a company, not for Petrojam. But what I think, remember, there's a lack of understanding as to how some of these processes work. But there's a very elaborate system of receiving products, receiving crude oil, receiving finished product, and the measurement systems that go into that. And then when you get it inside the refinery, how the product is moved. If it's crude oil, how it gets from the crude tank into the unit itself, what is measured moving from the unit to the intermediate tanks, from the intermediate tanks to the loading rack. And along those stages, you would have a person measuring. In the case of, say, finished product, you have
you can stop right there, Mr. Watson, because I'm actually not that far. Not all the way to the many persons who interact and the finished product. I would like for you, in the work and research you're doing at Petrojam, to go and look at the companies that, instead of relying on individuals, rely a lot on equipment to determine what is happening with their product. I've actually seen companies that don't have one single individual operating in the entity because of wanting to make sure that there is nothing that can be tampered with by individuals. So I would love for us, in doing the work and assessment of determining how much is it that we're receiving, to find out, can we organize our processes in such a way that we can be less reliant on individuals?
Remember, the entity that is doing the inspection is a company, right? Yes, there are individuals employed to the company. Within the refinery itself, you have gauges on every tank. You have meters that measure products moving. So from the crude tank to the refinery unit, there's a meter there. So you have measuring systems.
How many spot audits takes place at Petrojam as it relates to verifying what happens when these individual companies, it's a company, it's not an individual, come in and do their assessment? How many spot audits do you have? How many times do you go in and say, let me verify that information that we're receiving? I know why I'm asking this question, because for us to have been suffering billions and billions and billions over the years, somebody's stealing. And stealing is obviously taking place at various stages. And I believe in any audit, to determine what we are losing, you have to start at the beginning of receiving. So I would love to get an idea, how much does Petrojam literally go in and do sting operations to reassess something that somebody has just recorded to say this is it? Immediately afterwards, you shut them down and say, let us continuously run a spot check to determine that the information we're getting is accurate.
In addition, remember, to just receiving products like that, we also have internal security. We have external security.
Mr. Watson, you actually missed my point. Those are all people. You're missing my point.
At the end of the day, so we do audits and we do a daily check and balance of all oil movement and storage. And we use a
Mrs. Holness, who are you suggesting would do the
system.
spot audit?
My suggestion, member, is that we would have to take you through the entire process for you to see it. But it is done like that.
No, what she's saying, and if I can understand, in points 9 and 10 of the Auditor General's report, one of the things that the Auditor General cited is that you did not put corrective measures in place based on what it is. So to determine the oil losses, and she was very clear in pointing out that there were no corrective measures that were put in place. To look in point 9 and 10 of the original what thing.
Page?
And page 12 and 13. Under point 10, Petrojam did not have an efficient system to validate the volume of products received against the volume of products ordered. So that is...
I know. It actually indicated that we are somewhat doing an estimate. As an auditor, Mr. Watson, and let me tell you, this thing has actually kept me up at night because we literally spend a lot of time. I know 20 million is not chicken feeding. I know 97 and 9, but I am convinced that we are actually continuing to gallop down a road where there is evidently some element of collusion, some element of combined theft. And I'm concerned because I believe there will be persons in the operations over the years and years and years who would have been able to do some things like, one, looking to other systems and how it is that they verify that they actually get what they have bought. And we haven't made the effort to do it. We have not made the effort to be able to assess billions of dollars that we would be losing over time. So though Chairman would have seen the spike in the 5-year period, it is evident that if this is something that happened in 5 years, it was happening 5 years before that and 5 years before that. So as a country, we would have been losing and losing and losing. And it is very easy for us to steal 1%, between 2% of oil loss because of heat and rising oil gas versus 3%, wherein we could have actually been at 1%, but we don't know. And we literally hide billions and billions of dollars of losses in something that we call meeting the worldwide standard. We say, okay, we're in the standard. So I'm saying, Mr. Watson, literally, I sort of digress from everything else because I have a deep concern as an ex-auditor that we have a problem and the problem continues. And I personally believe that we're not true to ourselves if we don't say that inside of Petrojam, and members, I'm not letting the former minister off the hook, but inside of Petrojam, we need to revisit. We need to have some sting operations. We need to use those sting operations to then do the comparisons as to how Petrojam functions under sting operation versus how it functions over the years of comfort. And I'm laying it on the table, I'm putting it on record, because something is rotten and we are not wanting to face it.
Isn't this why we're having a forensic audit? Isn't that what we're trying to get to the bottom of through a forensic audit?
Chairman, the forensic audit will give you some idea over time as to what is going on. But Chairman, unless persons would have changed their individual and collective behavior, I believe that the losses continue.
Well, it is the role of the board of Petrojam and its management, supported by the ministry, to put management arrangements in place to eliminate or reduce as much as possible these losses. If you look at the figures between 2014-15 and 2015-16, under the then general manager, the unaccountable losses fell from 131,544 barrels to 49,757. And then they moved the following year, 16-17, from that 49,757 up to 118,639, and the year after that to 184,951. So it is for management to look at this and deal with it.
Chairman, not the board, not the minister, and that's exactly my point, Chairman. That's the point I'm making. that the management and workers of the institution, not the board or the ministry, will be able to get to the bottom of this. And that's why I use the word collusion. In any organization, Chairman, I can tell you, between the minister, between the board, at the end of the day, and I don't want to cast aspersions on individuals at Petrojam, because in every organization you have persons who are good and some not so good. So Mr. Watson, the intention is not to cast aspersions. But I do believe that there is a deeper rot that is taking place in how we do our day-to-day activities. And something is happening in terms of a systematic theft of our resources, and it is just not coming to the fore.
But it is the duty of the board. That's what it's tasked with. It's to hold management accountable for that, and for ensuring that necessary arrangements are put in place to reduce or eliminate those losses. That's what the board is for. It can't do it itself. But it must hold management to account. That is what the board is obliged to do.
I think we need to understand the process.
Mr. Watson.
I think we need. Hello? Yeah. Yes. I think we need to understand the process.
To the mic, because you're heading.
When we have oil coming in, there is a check and balance. There's a security system. There are independent inspectors. There are metering system. we do a daily reconciliation. We have security at the gate for products leaving, for products moving. We have excise officers at the refinery who monitor products moving from the refinery to the loading rack. So there are different points of checks and balance. And I am saying in the last couple of months, what we have also instituted, daily balance and reconciliation. And we have seen where the numbers are significantly below the world standard. Now, the world standard did not just come up by Petrojam setting a number. It came up looking at the experience, because within the refinery business, you're going to have evaporation loss. You have oil that you use in the system itself, whether you're running your boilers, you're flaring oil. If you have products that's given, if the refinery is not working, you have to stop it back into the tank. So there are many movements and checks and balances. I think the way to possibly understand it, as I said, and the pace, and the chairman alluded to it, when the audit comes, they will see and they will understand our checks and balances and our movements. But there is a very elaborate system that monitors products going in and out of the refinery. It's not as you say.
Quick question. You said that you have experienced lower than world standards over the last couple of months. How does that compare to your own previous standards?
Well, it would be below our
No,
standard.
give us figures.
Oh, we're the standard we use is 0.4. We're down to 0.2, I believe. 0.2.
You're down to 0.2.
Correct.
And what was the standard on average over the 5-year in losses?
0.7.
Okay. So, Mr. Watson, by your own admission, if because you are now paying closer attention at Petrojam, you have moved from 0.7 to as low as 0.2.
No, it's not because we're now paying closer attention.
What is it, Mr.
What would have caused that significant reduction?
There are several. Hang on.
Yes, a point.
Sorry.
Let me get that again. You say you moved from 7 to 2, no? Or 0.74.
There are several things that created the oil loss in the first place. For instance, one of them is we have a tank that's somewhere in the region of 400,000 barrels.
You say you're at 0.14?
0.4.
0.4.
One of them was in the region of 400,000 barrels. That tank had a significant loss, leaking. So you have losses there as well. So that tank was taken out of service. That tank is now being repaired. And that alone creates a significant reduction in your losses.
Is that a crude oil tank or a finished product?
It's a crude oil tank.
But if that would have been a huge, that should have been a huge pointer for you to have identified if that one single tank
did.
could affect your numbers in such a significant way. No, but it should not have lasted long, because if you, according to you, you do daily checks. If you do daily checks, the moment you realize that you have significant differences over a 2-day period, you would have taken it out.
What is required to take a 400,000 barrel tank out of service is not something you shut down the next day.
So you can't remove it to something else?
No, you don't just take it out. That is our largest crude tank. It takes months of planning to take a 400,000 barrel tank out of service.
No, question. No, hold on, Mr. Watson. Hold on, Mr. Watson.
No,
hold on.
but I'm saying it's a planned process.
Mr. Watson, how much do you sell in any 1 week? So are you saying it would take a long time before you take even another delivery? So even if it is that you actually pulled it down.
Remember, you need to understand the process. That's what I'm saying. We have 1 million barrels of crude storage. You have 3 ships approximately coming in every month. If you take of 350,000 barrels each time.
Mr. Watson, please speak into the microphone.
I'm trying.
Yeah.
If you take a 400,000 barrel tank out of service, then it significantly restricts how you can receive other products. Prior to that, thank you. Prior to that, there was a fire on a previous tank, so we were restricted in the amount of tankages that we had for crude. So taking out a 400,000 barrel tank, as I said, is not something like you go there, it's leaking, and you decide, let's stop using it. It's not done like that. You have to plan the exercise. You have to plan from a logistics standpoint how you're going to be receiving the incoming when you take that tank out of service, which is something we have to plan and which we are doing right now.
Mr. Watson, is it fair to say that when you're looking at unaccounted losses in oil, you need to differentiate between unrefined crude and finished products? Because people are not going to be stealing unrefined crude. At least I would have thought the demand from the point of view of theft would be for finished products.
Primarily, that's
so
where
though you can have losses of crude
but we're talking
through
about
leakages in tanks and so on. When you're talking about malfeasance, when you're talking about theft.
No, but the numbers included crude as well. Huh?
But that's not. It could not be material, Chairman, even if you had crude leaking. And if it is that you receive product once per month, you would have been able in that period to identify some other place of storage. So when your next shipment come in, and even if you couldn't catch the next shipment, you would have been able to catch a shipment, worst case, 2 months down the line to store that crude. But it wasn't crude that accounted for most of your oil losses, but finished product, refined product.
Have to look at the... Mr.
Do we have any data on how the losses are split out between crude and unaccounted?
We have accounted for and unaccounted for losses. We'd have to look at the details, the breakdown. I know we have it in terms of all the different products. I am saying that in the overall number of losses, a significant portion of that would have been crude. Not just that one tank. There are other tanks that leak. There are tanks that the seals your evaporation losses may be high as well. So it's a systematic exercise of going through, repairing your tanks, checking your pump seals, checking your flaring, and making sure that you're fixing. Pardon? I don't think it would. If you take a tank like the crude tank that we're talking about, and typically any tank we repair to refine, you're easily talking 6 months to a year. To take a tank out and do the work on it. It takes a while.
I think coming from the AG's report, because there was a line, 1 second, member guy, because there was a line in the AG where it says, under point 9, page 12, Petrojam identified the sources of the unaccountable oil losses. It was not successful in addressing the problem despite spending US $990,000 call it $991,000, to implement measures aimed at minimizing oil losses for which it had control. Petrojam's failure to act in implementing corrective works to improve working conditions at the refinery also resulted in Petrojam having to pay monthly discomfiture allowances to staff totaling $57 million between April 2015 and July 2018. So I think certainly from where I sit, I can see where Member Holness is going. It's almost the urgency. So I hear what you're saying about there's a system and systematic procedures, but what really is the urgency? That's why I said if it was your business,
I pick up urgency because the prover system was never commissioned. It cost over $400,000 US to buy, and it's 10 years ago and it has never been used, and parts of it are now obsolete.
Chairman, Chairman, I believe that is on purpose, Chairman, and that is actually my concern. When you run a business where there is no effort to put a system in place that ensures that you know beyond a shadow of a doubt what you receive, you will never know where anything went wrong along the process. So you'll be putting in all kind of systems to close what is already gone out the door.
Remember, I'm going to ask Mr. Morgan to address some of your questions. He's the technical person in charge of
Chairman,
oil
that situation Ms. Holness described was compounded by employing some incompetent people down there too.
The oil losses flew after 2014-15.
And as I said, before Mr. Morgan speaks, remember, you do have an audit coming up, and that will also shed some light on some of the concerns that we are raising here. It is being corrected, and it's an ongoing issue. A refinery doesn't just stop leaking oil in one day. In fact, it never does.
Mr. Morgan.
No, Chairman, before Mr. Morgan
I'll allow Mr. Morgan to speak.
Mr. Watson, before Mr. Morgan speaks, when did you have this massive leak from that huge storage tank of $400,000?
Started picking up around 2014, 13.
When was it discovered?
Sorry? Around 2014.
Around 2014. And basically what happened, it was repaired when?
It's being repaired now.
Oh, it's being repaired now.
That's correct.
All right, so it's 2014. If you look at AG's report on page 32, to look at total oil loss trend analysis, you say it's 2014 that was found. But in 2015-16, there was a significant reduction in the unaccountable losses. Okay? But then when 16-17, it went up back, and it went further in 2017-18 to 184, coming from 49,000 in 2015-16, 118,000 in 2016-17, 184,000 in 2017-18. But even at that very minimum, Chairman, in 2015-16, we still had that problem existing, predating that from 2014. So, how significant could that have been in the whole scheme of things? Because despite the fact, as you say, Mr. Watson, and as Mr. Morgan just confirmed, that that leak was detected or found out in 2014, never fixed until it is being done now. Petrojam was able in 2015-16 to reduce that from 134 the previous year, 115 the year before that, to 49,000 at that year.
And that tank is only dealing with crude, losses of crude. But most of the losses we're talking about, I suspect, are not
crude. As I said, oil loss program at Petrojam is an ongoing activity. So there are times when you may see the numbers go up, you may see the numbers go down, but we try and manage within a range. Now, the point I was making earlier is that with the level of checks and balances that we have, and doing the daily checks, the daily balances as they call it. So if you look at Petrojam, you have something like 9 points where products coming in and going out. You have ships coming in with crude, ships coming in with finished product. You have ships leaving with finished product to go to Montego Bay. So you have to, and then receiving it in Montego Bay, again, is another exercise. So along all of those supply chains, transferring from the crude tank to the refinery, refinery to the finished product tank to sales tank, all of those movements can create losses. And that's some of what Mr. Morgan was going to explain between unaccounted for and accounted for losses. So if you just let him give you some of the breakdown, he has, I think we have some of the numbers in terms of the products that were lost, then that may help explain some of it.
Mr. Morgan, in your explanation, I would love for you to help us to very clearly understand between your 0.74% loss that you're experiencing coming down to your 0.2% now is a 270% movement, 270% improvement. Please ensure in your explanation I leave with a better sense that 270% movement wasn't billions and billions and billions of dollars into people's pocket.
Morning, Chairman, morning, members. It's very important that around oil loss that there is context and perspective. There is absolutely no refinery anywhere in the world that experiences zero oil loss. The very movements that Mr. Watson spoke about, the very handling, the nature of oil itself lends itself to tolerances. Important to note, in the document that we have provided, it delves into what the industry is about. Importantly, what is the industry variance that is accepted widely? What is that variance? That variance is typically around 0.35 up to 0.9%. Important to know that. In the scale of what occurred over the 5 years, we had roughly about 80 million barrels of oil finished products passing through the refinery. Of that, we recovered roughly, I think, about 78 million, and that is more for what you would have sold. Of the 2 million difference, roughly about 1.4 million was used as fuel within the refinery, and the difference is contextualized as losses. Bear with me, again, Chairman and members. It's important, again, to put in context what's happening in the industry, and I will get to those points, member. I'll get to them. In neighboring refineries, just not going even too far from here, without getting into name calling, comparative size refinery, not too far away from here, up to the time when we're looking at our numbers, we're experiencing around the same 0.7, 0.72 losses as well. Roughly about 100,000 barrels per year around that particular period. Oil importing country, right? Go further to an oil producing country. Their loss percentage was 3%. Now let's take into context. We are a 30,000 barrels per day refinery. Consider a refinery that is 200,000 barrels per day. That's losing 0.4%. You can do the math on that. And any given year, they are losing in the order of about 240,000 barrels, roughly. And it is important that the context be brought into oil and its movement and its behavior. Importantly, Chairman, even your very car, Chairman, it is advisable because of the nature of oil, its expansion, contraction, by which all measurements, member, not only from an actual measurement of the volume itself, but its temperature also plays a part. A 0.1 difference in degree, there's a factor which you have to apply, and these sort of measurements and factors lends itself to those tolerances I spoke about earlier between the 0.35 to 0.9. So that is what is established in the industry. To further add to this, the matter of accounted for losses and unaccounted for losses, these are normal nomenclature in the oil industry. For the initiated in the industry, these are standard things. The perspective that must be brought to this, Chairman, is that in terms of unaccounted for losses, this is not to say you have absolutely no idea where this is. What it is basically it's a catch-all section, and let me explain that. So in terms of our numbers, and sorry for the lecture, Chairman and members, but I think it is very important that we understand and appreciate what the whole business of oil and its handling is actually about. So, the matter of accounted for squarely, as well documented here, speaks to those losses that, yes, you can account for, you can measure, etc. There's a portion that is unaccounted for. Where are those? What is that lumped up into? It may be one, did we accurately measure the fuel that's used in the refinery? And if we didn't, which is part of the details in all of this, and we welcome the forensic audit, because yes, there are challenges around that. So, if we, let's say, underestimated the fuel that we're using, by virtue of how the inventory is done, and member Honus, I'm sure you're quite aware of inventory measurements. If you did not account, let's say, for your fuel well, then that turns up in the whole ball game as a loss. That said, bear with me a little bit more, Chairman and members. So, accounted for, we have highlighted that in the document as to those volumes. And of the approximately 600,000 barrels, we pointedly highlighted roughly about 375,000 barrels that we accounted for of the 600. That's roughly about 64%. The other 34%, which represents 217,000 barrels thereabout, would have been lumped up into areas. Did we measure the fuel well? Did we measure the water content in the fuel that we're producing well? Did we do the best job possible, let's say, on the temperature measurements and the conversion? And these are the nuances that present themselves in terms of the oil business and how it is. I go back to a point, Chairman, of your very car. If you purchase fuel, let's say around midday when it's hot, you actually recognize actually an unrealized gain, because it actually tricks the meter because it has expanded. If you were to park your car immediately in a dry or cool area, and you measure that volume sometime in the evening when it's cool, you'll realize that you got a different volume initially from what you had in the car. These are some of the nuances we're talking about. Mr. Watson highlighted about 7 to 9 areas in the refinery that we're moving products, and at each point it lends itself to these vagaries and technicalities. So I'm pointing out, Chairman, that it's not an easy business. There are systems that we have put in place. Have we had challenges? Yes, we have had challenges. The Auditor General's report did not, unfortunately, highlighted the major works that we were doing, which was majority of our attention on our crude tanks, our tanks in general. Since 2013, we have repaired roughly, I think, 10 to 11 tanks, 2 of which are under repairs. Right now, we have spent around $18 million repairing those tanks. The most significant being Tank 118, which is our massive crude tank, which 18 million US, right? Correct. Right, in perspective, thank you. And so we have embarked on that. In fact, even as the Auditor General was present at the refinery, these mitigative actions were in train. They have now brought us the sort of result that we expected. We did have challenges, Chairman. I believe we're at a better place now, and Tank 118 has put us in a better place. Did we know it was a challenge? Yes. Did we have to manage the situation over time? Yes, we had to do that, Chairman. And we are now, I think, based on our last result here ending, we're about 0.2%, which represents about 18,000 barrels for last financial year in terms of our losses. Again, Chairman, oil loss must be brought in perspective and context in looking at these aspects of the business.
What were your unaccounted oil losses for the 18-19 financial year?
The unaccounted?
Yeah.
With that, interestingly, Chairman, we're actually running at a gain in terms of unaccounted for. So in aspects, there's actually no unaccounted for losses for 2018-19.
What has happened to cause that? What has happened to cause that?
So again, not to get too technical, Chairman.
Listen,
yes?
It's millions and zillions of dollars that turn on this, you know.
Correct.
So it's not a question of not being too technical.
Yes.
In 14-15, the 15-16 rather, you saved nearly 100,000, call it 90,000 barrels in reduction of unaccounted oil losses.
Yes.
That's a lot of money.
Indeed.
And you're saying in the last financial year you had none. I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah. So how was that achieved in both of those years?
So again, context, Chairman. The tank in particular, that massive crude tank 118, which holds between 400 and 450,000 barrels, Chairman. Not only did we have issues with its floor and its leakage, but also the seal on the tank, the rate of evaporation, etc., during those times. We encountered challenges, Chairman, and I'm sure this will come out in the forensic audit as well. That particular tank, yes, it contained crude, it contained sludge, it contained water. How do you differentiate on a month-to-month basis? And there were challenges around ascertaining what was sludge, what portion of that was water, what do you accounted for in terms of your oil itself. So there were nuances, Chairman. Now that those nuances pertaining to 118 is now behind us, and we saw that, Chairman, almost immediately as we took 118 out of service. I think it was around May, July of last year. We always saw our numbers going in the right direction. And that's where the focus has been over the years.
Mr.
More
Morgan,
on the tank repairs
one second.
rather than
the leak, Mr. Chairman, just for my clarification, and forgive my basic question, what kind of leak was it? Was it in the, how was the leak? You said it was a leakage, a surface leak, then was it a slow leak? Was it a leak in the concrete? Was it tell me what the leak was and why it took.
So the normal construction of tanks take on different codes and standards. Tank 118 itself has been in service since the last repairs, up to this point, about 20 years out of service. That tank is actually built with steel plates on basically a sand base itself. So when the tank floor leaks, it actually leaks into the ground underneath the refinery. And how do we know this, member? Is that we do have test wells around the refinery. We're measuring the level of plume, which we are actually recovering oil as well. So there's strong evidence that we have volumes of oil under the refinery, which is why, again, if the Auditor General had gone deeper, they would have realized that there's a project to recover oil from underground the refinery, which is what
let me stop you right
well.
there. I won't even have the Auditor General stop you. That was your responsibility to advise.
But member,
because it means that you can equally leak it out underground and steal it.
No. Member,
Mr.
it
Morgan,
is there.
One
It
second.
is there for
One
record.
second.
That's
One
just
second,
one.
Mr. Morgan.
Mr.
One
Morgan.
second.
That's just
One
one
second.
aspect,
Mrs.
member.
Hollis.
That's just one aspect.
1 second, ma'am. Mr. Morgan, 1 second. 1 second. Mr. Morgan. Mr. Morgan.
Yes.
The Auditor General would like to say something.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just want to draw your attention to Table 3 of page 34 of the report. Analysis. Well, let me draw your attention to page 33 first, where you'll see a pie chart that provides information, reported information obtained from Petrojam, not generated by the Auditor General's Department. And so largely, the concern circled the source not specified at 37%. We did not derive that figure that was reported by Petrojam. Likewise, there was a loss on transfer of 9%, loss attributed to leaks, 8%, loss on sales, 2%. Loss during processing, 44%. We would have taken that into consideration. So much of what has been reported here, we would have taken into consideration already. Further, Petrojam reported that it converted 94% of its crude. So my understanding from that is that there's a 6% loss, suggesting that what was reported by Petrojam, and I mean, you are at liberty to correct your figures, but what was reported suggested that the emphasis was really not on crude, but on finished products. As it relates to the projects undertaken by Petrojam over the period, I can report what information I was supplied with, which should have come from Petrojam. The first, you spoke to it just now, the tank master, a cost as at August 2018 for $430,000 US. The timeline for completion of installation was December 2017. That was not achieved. The crude charge mass flow meter to accurately measure the unit's crude oil consumption, which is a pivotal number for oil loss calculations, that should have been completed December 2017. That was not achieved. Water draw-off interface detector, 2017, not achieved. Dock lines monitoring, delivery again for December 2017, not achieved. Flare meters at a cost of $28,000, delivery deadline December 2017, not achieved. Audit and calibration of slop and rundown meter, September 2017, achieved. LPG meter approval for $506,711 US for February 2018, not achieved. PSV audit and flare and sizing with a delivery expectation date of October 2017, not achieved. So the projects were taken into consideration. If there has been a change in the delivery of this, then this information has not been provided to me. If it's in the docket, I must apologize that I've really not had an opportunity to go through all the details in the dockets provided, but you can update the committee appropriately.
Yes, Mr. Morgan.
Okay, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, AG.
Good review, AG. Again, perspective. The list here you would have seen quite obviously doesn't take into consideration the tank repair program. That was the focus over the period. I dare say that this particular list here, I would not say it was a wish list. As to how the dates were arrived at, would have had to have a discussion with the general manager at the time. But the focus was more around containment of the oil within the tanks and the pipelines. Now, of this particular list, I can highlight that the flare meter was actually installed and is working and was actually commissioned around the time when the Auditor General was actually on site. Our tank master program is well underway, which we expect at least part to be commissioned by around July, August of this year, and the entire system to be in place by the end of this particular year. We have had to review the list, and I'm sure Chairman and members, one can appreciate the fact that one has to rationalize the various objectives that you're undertaking, because there are other business imperatives that one has to look at in terms of driving the numbers. To us, Chairman, is that we have taken 118 out of service. Our numbers have trended in a particular direction, which is positive for us. Not that we have lost sight of these initiatives, but we would have had to prioritize. The Tank Master, member, is one of our big projects this year, which we expect to deliver on, and that will now provide that confirmatory check that is required to ensure that the manual check. I want to underscore, Chairman, that the American Petroleum Institute standard for measurement of oil, anywhere, I'm saying anywhere in the Americas, is actually manual checks. Believe it or not, that is what it is. That's a number one. Failing that, now they revert to metering system, tank level gauge system. So what Petrojam is doing in terms of its reconciliation is standard. We do recognize that we need to have that backed up with other systems, and that's what we're aggressively working on, member, in terms of our tank master system, which is very prominent on our capital expenditure projects for this year. Members, it's 10 to 1. We normally break a little bit earlier than this, unless anybody is...
Chairman,
yes,
I just want to address one short point about even doing audits. So one of the things we do, member, when we send a ship, for instance, to Montego Bay, we will send our security personnel to go to Montego Bay, not telling the terminals that we're coming. And he will go down there and observe the ship coming in and the offloading procedure. And that's something we do on as part of our spot basis as well. So it's not unusual.
I am hoping Mr. Watson get my point. When we are having ZOSO and SOEs, somehow from time to time there are persons who know before we have secretly gone down there. So I am at a place where, and I'm serious, I am at a place where in addition to the systems and the independent companies, I would love to see us organizing through independent means to have some serious spot audits of individuals that we don't keep in touch with, that are rotated. That's why the security guard company rotates some of the persons, so that you don't know that you have not established a relationship and you can't be a part of the collusion. I kid you not, Mr. Watson, unfortunately systems that rely more and more on human beings often end up having more and more issues in terms of our ability to manipulate. And so hearing that you're finally at a place where the capital expenditure is going to be put in place to put a system that, yes, is not manual and people rely on manual, but I would love to see a system in place that can help us to measure billions and billions of dollars of what we receive, and that can always be backed up by something manually, so that you are then able to make the comparison and say, okay, the system must be off because the person manually has said X, Y, Z. Or when we come and do a spot audit, we realize the manual individual needs to go.
All right, thank you, Ms. Solis.
All right.
Members, I think we can break at this juncture. Somebody move for the adjournment. Fitz-Jackson, seconded by Member Clark. In terms of the date of next meeting, the clerk has explained that it is going to be difficult for us to meet next week because of a lot of activities that are going on that would make. So I'm proposing that we meet in a fortnight, resume in a fortnight. Yeah.
Could the permanent secretary again write to MOCA and the Integrity Commission? A reminder, because you didn't specify the date that you wrote to them and their response was not forthcoming. So perhaps, No, she said they did not give a response as to the
No,
timing.
no, member. I didn't say they didn't give a response. They didn't give a response as to the time when they would be finished.
That's what I just said.
But they responded to me. They did. They did respond to me.
So in other words, could you, I'm asking, through you, Mr. Chairman, if you could write again, asking if they are any closer to a decision.
Chair, just a little addendum to my colleague's question.
The meeting adjourned.
No, it's not adjourned yet. In the PS's correspondence with the Integrity Commission and MOCA, they might not be able to give a precise date, but ask them to at least provide an indicative date based on where they are in the investigations. Investigators usually tell you that they will find some things that cause them to move on to some other things, but at least an indicative time frame. Because it can't be an endless exercise.
Before we adjourn, Chairman, I actually...
He doesn't want to know about investigation.
No, wait, Chairman, no, I can't say we adjourn already. Chairman, just one quick point.
This is...
I was asking persons at Petrojam and the ministry, is there any more efficient way that we can sort of deal with the remaining issues? Because I'm a bit concerned in terms of how much work is getting done between Petrojam, Ministry of Science and Technology, the AG's office, based on the amount of times we have called them.
We're quite near
so
the
I'm
end
just
of the,
wondering how much we have left.
We're quite near the end of the prompt now, and we won't be meeting next week, so they'll have a fortnight before we meet. The date of next meeting is the 11th of June is the date of the next meeting. We adjourn. Thank you, members.
Hi, I'm Tyrus Riley, and I'm here to tell you